Okay, so here's what we're trying to do again with our sort of assessment or instructional model, a subset of which will be our assessment model. So we're trying to shorten the student improvement cycle, focus our instructional resources, make sure that our assessed standards are more rigorous, and ensure we are getting students through material, so really focusing on our completion rates, specifically targeting the first month of contact with them. And again, we had gone through some different models to focus what we do as teachers, because we don't always get as many contact hours with these students as regular schools. And we're sort of in this core versus non-core, or going by objectives, realizing that we have to balance what is in the distance learning modules due to teacher time with the general objectives, specific objectives created by the curriculum. So we've taken a look at this sort of grading method and took your advice that that may be too complex a strategy. And so here's what we would go over right now as we're getting to what the model would look like. So the first thing that we're thinking of is we go through the curriculum, so the general objectives and the specific objectives, and we pick out what really matters. Now we'll have to define that a little bit later on, but that'll be one of the questions for us, is how we pick what to focus on. So we've got the content that our teachers would focus on in sort of their face-to-face contact, and that would be a short formative assessment cycle here, where some instruction is provided, some diagnostic happens, and then some products are produced. And so keeping that short turnaround time. The diagnostic could just be questions we're asking them, but we're just verifying that they are confident in their answers. They don't need too much prompting in order to get response, and by prompting I mean when we ask them a question they can give an answer. So it's not assessing how much help we're providing them, but when we do ask them a question, how much do we need to guide them along the way after instruction has been provided. And then some products would be produced, and we realized those products could take lots of different forms. Those products could just be verbal responses. They could be assignment questions completed out of a module, textbook questions completed out of a module, or questions whipped up on the spot, or larger skill-based products that are being done. Those products would be assessed using that rating scale you've given us, insufficient or limited, meaning they haven't passed, adequate, proficient, or excellent. And we're also sort of debating, in some cases maybe with a short turnaround, it just makes sense to do you've met it or you haven't met it. So that would be sort of the short instruction on the core content done in a face-to-face format, with sort of exit options if we think the student is reached a proficient level. So here we're shooting for a proficient level, not adequate, because we're focusing on sort of the major essential topics, not focusing on everything due to lack of contact time in an outreach school, which traditional face-to-face classes don't worry about. Now, so as they complete this, we're guaranteeing they're at this proficient level, so they've passed the stuff that we have worked with them on. And then we need to basically give a predictor mark here. And sorry, I don't want to reveal too much. So we give them a predictor mark. So based on this general objective along this grading scale, here is how we think you understand the concept, and then we would want to verify that based upon a summative assessment, or the summative assessment would verify that. So that summative assessment, if we've taught them face-to-face, a test may make sense. We have gone to common assessments in our division, and we're in that process, or an exemplar continuum. So basically two ways of assessing these objectives is exemplar continuum if it makes sense, and that would be the ideal way, or a test. The other thing we're thinking of is, instead of giving a percentage, we use that rating scale like you have, and because we have to communicate percentages, we convert these to a percentage. Now here's some thinking. You'll notice these have a gap in here. Trying to convert this rating scale to a percentage we think would be overly precise, and we don't think we can really do it. We can give a general range of where the student would lie. We also want to resist for our teachers conveying the idea that a rating scale can just be converted into a percentage. And so we'd use this sort of jumps, 50 to 60, a jump from 70 to 80, and a jump from 90 to 100. How come? Just we don't feel that the rating scale would allow us to be more precise than that, but feedback on that is welcome. What do we do with the extra stuff that we haven't sort of taught face-to-face? Typically for the outreach world, that would be the distance learning materials. What we've find is with those distance learning materials, providing feedback on everything is overwhelming for the students. So we can provide them access to all that material, but if we are not providing really good feedback on those things, it doesn't make sense to treat those assignment questions really in a very formative way. They're really more summative, sort of here's the crack that you're doing at them, and here you go, you got them. Obviously, we help out students and we would let them go back, redo them, make up more questions. But in general, we find the students typically won't do that on those non-core questions, nor do our practice allow us much time for that. So really that non-core, and this may not be good wordage, but we would treat as a summative assessment. And so our summative assessment would be based upon the core content that we've taught using this short cycle formative assessment, and the non-core, because we aren't going back and revisiting it, is more summative. Now, instead of trying to do some mathematical mashing of the grades, such as you'd sort of see here on this thing I'm pulling out, we're taking your advice and your good guidance and saying, why don't we just get 3 sources of evidence, how they did on the summative assessment for the core content, what the non-core ended up being, those assignment booklet questions in a summative way, and our sort of how we thought students did based upon our time with them. That sort of core instructional assessment, I guess, for lack of a better word. We take those 3 pieces of evidence and we feed them together. Instead of trying to do some weird grade compilation, we use our professional judgment to assign them a grade in one of these 3 areas. Really, are they adequate, proficient, or excellent? And we just assign them to a percentage. We're keeping, again, the percentages to a range of 10% because we feel we can play with that. If you get to the 15 or 16 and 2/3 percentage distribution, we just feel that's too big a spread for us. But that's feedback that we would welcome. Now, all this leads to a couple questions for us, Sid. One of those questions that it leads to is this grade compilation method a reasonable way to go, or any general feedback on this model? Also, the question it raises for us is, if we get right back to the beginning, how do we define what we are focusing in on? And this is a question I don't think we've quite answered yet. Are we defining what we're focusing in on based upon just what we consider important as teachers, based upon vertical alignment of the curriculum to next year's course, or in a 30-level course to the diploma? Are we defining what we're really focusing our teaching on based upon what's the minimum students need to master in order to pass a course? Or is the core content using the short cycle formative assessment defined by what teachers are really leading, where we're developing our formative assessment? How come this question comes up is maybe there is a great question in the Alberta Distance Learning module assignment booklets. What happens if we don't necessarily provide a lot of instruction, direct instruction from the teacher on that topic? Well, if that's what's happening, that would be how we'd be defining core here. That's essential for students to know. We'd like to provide some feedback, but we aren't necessarily going to provide that to you as you encounter that information. If, on the other hand, we say we really need to do a good job of understanding if you know that stuff, then we're looking at that 3rd model. Now, with this, what we're also planning to add in here is any of those core content, however we define it, would need to have good scaffolding exercises surrounding them. So if we have a skill or a content piece that we are teaching through the short cycle formative assessment, we'd need to have our lesson plans in place that have good scaffoldings above and below, as well as ideally exemplar continuum surrounding those content or skills. That way, when we're in these little short turnaround times, we've got an hour or so with those students, maybe over a couple hours over a couple days, we can really guide them up to the level that they need to, rather than having to think about how to whip stuff up on the spot. So that's our general model that we're thinking of. Again, to summarize in terms of the grading, what it would look like is our teachers are providing lots of instruction, short turnaround formative assessment on core areas. When students are proficient in those core areas, or proficient as we diagnose those general objectives or specific objectives, then we're ready for our summative assessment. We give students a predictor mark, as they've been getting all throughout here, on how we think that they have mastered that objective. And then we do a summative assessment upon that, either using a test on just those core subjects or an exemplar continuum. The non-core stuff, extra questions that they may have completed independently with distance learning guided material, would basically be a summative assessment here. We feed these three pieces of information: our teacher opinion based upon working with them in a formative way, our summative assessment evidence, and the summative assessment evidence of the non-core stuff. We've got those three pieces of information that we compile into a grade using our teacher professional judgment, using this rating scale as a guideline, knowing that we cannot be too precise in the awarding of those percentages. And that would basically be sort of the heart of our grading strategy, and also provides a strong basis for our assessment strategy. Following this, what would come out would be a whole bunch of other pieces that we would need to develop. That would be grade reporting, and we'll still be working on scheduling, course prep work, systems of interventions, the particular instructional strategies, what stuff is suited for blended, and how do we do this, and what tools and resources are needed.